Ask anyone what makes a person attractive and they will mention looks, confidence, maybe a sense of humor. Almost nobody mentions smell. And yet, the fragrance industry generates over $50 billion every single year. Perfume outsells almost every other luxury product on the planet. People who will agonize for weeks over buying a new coat will walk into a department store and spend $300 on a small glass bottle without blinking. We treat scent like a finishing touch, a minor accessory, something you spray on before leaving the house. There is just one problem with that story. Smell is not a finishing touch. It is the oldest, deepest, and most neurologically powerful sense the human brain possesses. And the history of perfume is not a story about vanity or luxury. It is a story about religion, power, medicine, war, colonization, and one of the most sophisticated chemical industries ever built by human hands. The part that surprises almost everyone is where it started. Not in a French laboratory. Not in a Renaissance perfumer's shop in Florence. Not even in ancient Egypt, which is where most people assume the story begins. It started in smoke. Thick, billowing, deliberately chosen smoke rising from altars in ancient Mesopotamia over 4,000 years ago. And the word perfume itself carries that origin inside it. Perfumum. Latin for through smoke. Every bottle of Chanel No. 5 sitting on a dressing table today carries the fingerprints of a Sumerian priest standing over a burning altar, convinced that the gods could smell what he was offering them. That is the story nobody tells when they sell you a fragrance. So let us tell it properly. The earliest record of deliberate scent use comes from ancient Mesopotamia, the region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now modern Iraq and Syria, dating back to at least 4000 BCE. These were not people experimenting with personal grooming. They were conducting religious rituals in which specific aromatic materials were burned as direct communication with the divine. Cedar wood. Myrrh. Cypress resin. Juniper berries. Each material was chosen deliberately because ancient priests believed the gods had preferences. The right scent, burned at the right time, could open a channel between the human world and the divine one. The wrong scent, or no scent at all, and your prayer simply would not reach its destination. And here is the detail that completely changes how you see ancient religion. These early perfumers were not amateur enthusiasts. They were specialists, trained professionals who held significant political and social power because of their expertise. The knowledge of which resins burned cleanest, which woods produced the most fragrant smoke, which combinations pleased which deities was carefully guarded information passed from priest to apprentice across generations. Scent knowledge was sacred knowledge. And sacred knowledge in the ancient world was the same thing as political power. The oldest named perfumer in recorded human history is a woman. Her name was Taputi de Lake Callum. She appears in a cuneiform tablet from approximately 1200 BCE describing her as a palace chemist in Babylonian Mesopotamia. The tablet describes her process of distilling flowers, oils, and aromatic resins and filtering them through water multiple times to concentrate their fragrance. This was not folk knowledge. This was systematic, repeatable chemistry. Written down, recorded, and attributed to a named individual over 3,000 years ago. Every modern perfumer using fractional distillation to isolate fragrance compounds is working inside a tradition that a Babylonian woman established and documented during the Bronze Age. If Mesopotamia invented perfume, Egypt industrialized it. By 3000 BCE, the Egyptians had transformed scent from a religious offering into a full-scale cultural institution with economic, political, medical, and cosmological dimensions that touched every layer of society. The Egyptians did not distinguish between perfume and medicine, between cosmetics and religious ritual, between personal grooming and spiritual protection. To them, scent was all of these things simultaneously. Kifi, the most famous Egyptian compound fragrance, was a blended mixture of 16 ingredients including honey, wine, raisins, myrrh, frankincense, and a resinous grass called skenas. Ancient texts describe it as something that could lull a person to sleep, dispel anxiety, purify the body, and please the gods, all at the same time. Modern pharmacological analysis of some Kifi ingredients has confirmed that several of the listed components do contain genuine sedative and antimicrobial compounds. The Egyptians were not inventing properties for dramatic effect. They were documenting real chemical interactions without a periodic table or a laboratory. But Egypt's most extraordinary contribution to perfume history was not a formula. It was infrastructure. The Egyptians established the world's first documented trade routes specifically oriented around aromatic materials. They sent expeditions to the land of Punt, believed to be located somewhere in modern-day Somalia or Eritrea, specifically to bring back living myrrh trees. Queen Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's most powerful pharaohs, documented one such expedition on the walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri around 1495 BCE. The carvings show Egyptian sailors loading myrrh trees, their roots carefully bundled in baskets, onto ships for the voyage home. This was not casual trading. This was state-sponsored botanical extraction. The pharaoh personally commissioning an overseas supply chain to secure control over aromatic materials. The logic is not complicated. Whoever controlled the frankincense and myrrh controlled access to the divine. And in a civilization where political authority and religious authority were the same thing, that control was worth crossing oceans for. Here is where the story takes a turn that almost nobody knows about. For most of ancient history, perfume was not a liquid you applied to your skin. It was oil-based, resin-based, or solid. Ancient Egyptians used scented fats and wax cones worn on the head that melted slowly in the heat, releasing fragrance throughout the day. Greeks and Romans used unguents, thick aromatic pastes applied directly to skin and hair. Liquid perfume as we understand it today, a solution of aromatic compounds dissolved in alcohol, did not exist for most of human history. It required a specific technological breakthrough that did not arrive until the 9th century CE. And it came from a Persian physician named Ibn Sina, known in Europe as Avicenna. Ibn Sina refined and perfected the process of steam distillation, a technique that uses controlled heat to vaporize volatile aromatic compounds from plant material and then condenses that vapor back into a concentrated liquid. His distillation improvements made it possible, for the first time, to capture the fragrance of a flower in a stable, concentrated, liquid form that could be stored, transported, and traded across vast distances. This single technical advancement is the reason modern perfume exists. Without Ibn Sina's distillation work, the global fragrance industry as we know it simply could not have developed. A physician working in medieval Persia, primarily interested in medicine and philosophy, accidentally invented the foundational technology of the modern beauty industry. If you are finding this fascinating and you want more stories that rewrite what you thought you knew about history, go ahead and subscribe. We pull apart famous narratives every single week and find what is actually underneath. The 14th century brought the Black Death, the most catastrophic pandemic in recorded European history, killing somewhere between 30 and 60% of Europe's total population in roughly 5 years. And inside that catastrophe, one of the most consequential and least discussed chapters in perfume history quietly unfolded. Medieval medical theory, based primarily on the work of ancient Greek physicians, held that disease was caused and transmitted by bad smells, toxic miasmas rising from rotting matter, stagnant water, and corrupted air. The logic, while completely wrong, was internally consistent. Bad smells caused disease. Therefore, good smells prevented it. This theory, called miasma theory, transformed aromatic materials into what medieval physicians genuinely believed were life-saving medicines. Perfumers were not beauticians. They were essentially pharmacists. Carrying pomanders, small perforated metal spheres filled with aromatic compounds including ambergris, cloves, camphor, and dried rose petals, was not an affectation of the wealthy. It was a rational public health response to a terrifying and poorly understood epidemic. Physicians treating plague patients wore the famous beaked masks stuffed with aromatic herbs specifically to filter the supposed miasmatic air they were breathing. The beak was a delivery system for preventive medicine that happened to also smell pleasant. The cruel irony is that the actual disease vector for bubonic plague was not bad air. It was fleas carried by rats. The pomanders and herbal masks did nothing to stop the Yersinia pestis bacterium. But the pursuit of protective scent drove enormous demand for aromatic materials, accelerated the development of distillation technology, and established networks of aromatic trade across Europe that would eventually feed directly into the development of modern perfumery in France. Even a catastrophically wrong medical theory generated genuine technological and commercial progress. The plague killed millions. But in doing so, it accidentally turbocharged the perfume industry. By the 16th century, something unusual was happening in a small town in the hills above the French Riviera. Grasse, originally a center of leather tanning, had begun transitioning into a perfume production hub. The connection is not obvious until you understand the context. Tan leather in the 16th century smelled terrible. When Catherine de' Medici arrived in France from Florence to marry the future King Henry II, she brought with her an Italian perfumer named René Le Florentine, sometimes called René the Florentine. The fashion for perfumed leather gloves, which Catherine helped popularize at the French court, drove Grasse's leather tanners to begin working with the aromatic flowers that grew abundantly in the surrounding hills. Jasmine, rose, lavender, mimosa, tuberose. The Provençal climate and soil produced these flowers in extraordinary quality and quantity. And Grass's tanners discovered that the combination of their existing expertise in chemical processing with the extraordinary local botanicals could produce something far more valuable than a glove. They became perfumers. Within a century, Grasse had transformed from a leather town into the undisputed center of the global fragrance industry, a position it has held for over 400 years. The town developed highly specialized techniques for extracting floral fragrance, including enfleurage, a painstaking process in which fresh flowers are laid on glass sheets coated with cold fat, which absorbs the fragrance molecules as the flowers exhale them over days or weeks. The process captures floral notes that heat-based distillation would destroy, and it required extraordinary patience, skilled hands, and enormous quantities of fresh flowers. A single kilogram of jasmine absolute, one of the most prized fragrance ingredients ever produced, requires approximately 8 million hand-picked jasmine flowers. All of them picked before dawn when the aromatic compounds are most concentrated. For all of human history up to the late 19th century, every perfume ingredient had to be extracted from a natural source. Plants, animals, minerals. The quantities required were staggering, the costs prohibitive, and the supply chains fragile and often brutal. Civet musk, one of the most prized fixatives in perfume history, was extracted from glands near the genitals of civet cats, often under conditions of considerable cruelty. Ambergris, the other great animal fixative, came from the digestive tract of sperm whales, making it simultaneously rare, expensive, and deeply controversial. Musk deer were hunted to near extinction in parts of Asia to supply the perfume trade. The natural fragrance industry had a significant body count. Then in 1868, a British chemist named William Henry Perkin, the same man who accidentally discovered synthetic purple dye while trying to synthesize quinine, created the first synthetic aromatic compound. Coumarin. It smelled like freshly cut hay and tonka beans. It was not found in nature in usable quantities. It was built in a laboratory from coal tar derivatives. This was not a curiosity or a party trick. It was the beginning of a complete revolution in what perfumery could be. Within decades, chemists had synthesized vanillin, replicating the smell of vanilla without a single vanilla bean. Ion ones captured the scent of violet flowers. Aldehydes produced clean, abstract, almost metallic notes that had no direct natural equivalent whatsoever. Chanel No. 5, released in 1921 and still the best-known perfume in human history, was revolutionary precisely because it was the first major fragrance to use synthetic aldehydes as a primary component rather than as a supporting note. Its creator, Ernest Bose, was working in a laboratory environment closer to a chemistry workshop than a flower field. Coco Chanel reportedly chose it because it smelled like nothing that had ever existed before in nature. That was the point. Synthetic chemistry had given perfumers the ability to build smells from imagination, to create olfactory experiences that no plant or animal had ever produced. The history of perfume had traveled from a Sumerian priest burning cedar wood over a stone altar to a French chemist building abstract sensory experiences from industrial chemistry. Both were trying to create something that would make a human being feel something profound. The tools were entirely different. The ambition was exactly the same. The global perfume industry depends on a supply chain that stretches across some of the most economically exploited regions on the planet, and this is the part of perfume history that the luxury marketing almost never mentions. Sandalwood from India and later Australia. Vetiver from Haiti and Indonesia. Ylang ylang from the Comoros Islands. Rosado from Bulgaria and Turkey. Oud resin from agarwood trees in Southeast Asia, currently one of the most expensive raw materials on Earth by weight. Almost every natural fragrance ingredient of significance comes from a developing nation and travels to be processed and sold by companies headquartered in France, the United States, or Switzerland. The economics are stark. In the Comoros Islands, one of the world's poorest countries, ylang ylang flowers are harvested by hand by local workers who receive a tiny fraction of the final value of the fragrance oils they produce. In Haiti, vetiver farmers work land devastated by deforestation, earning subsistence wages while the roots they harvest end up in bottles selling for several $100s in Paris boutiques. The oud trade in Southeast Asia has driven several species of agarwood-producing trees to critically endangered status because wild trees infected with the fungus that produces oud resin are far more valuable than any number of replanted saplings. The perfume industry is worth $50 billion annually. The communities producing its raw materials have seen almost none of that wealth. This is not unique to perfume. It is the pattern of almost every luxury industry built on colonial-era supply chains that were never fundamentally restructured after formal colonialism ended. But perfume is a particularly sharp example because the luxury branding, the elegant bottles, the French names, the celebrity endorsements are specifically designed to create psychological distance between the product and its origins. You are not supposed to think about where it comes from. You are supposed to think about how it makes you feel. Here is the neuroscience that explains why perfume has held power over human beings since the Bronze Age and why it always will. Every other sense, vision, hearing, touch, taste, is processed through the thalamus, the brain's central relay station, before reaching conscious awareness. Smell is different. Olfactory signals travel directly from the nose to the olfactory bulb, which has direct connections to the amygdala, the brain's emotional processing center, and the hippocampus, which governs memory formation and retrieval. Smell bypasses the thalamic filter entirely. It hits the emotional and memory centers of the brain before the rational, language-based parts of your cortex even know something has arrived. This is why a particular smell can transport you to a specific moment in childhood with a vividness and emotional intensity that no photograph or recording can match. It is why certain scents can produce anxiety, calm, desire, or grief in people who have no idea why they are feeling what they are feeling. The smell of a hospital. Your grandmother's kitchen. The inside of a particular car. These are not just memories. They are neurological records stored with exceptional fidelity in a part of the brain that operates largely outside conscious control. The perfume industry has understood this, intuitively and then scientifically, for a very long time. When a fragrance house designs a scent, they are not just creating something pleasant. They are trying to trigger specific emotional states and specific associative memories in the people who wear it. The concept of a fragrance pyramid, with top notes that hit first, part notes that carry the main character, and base notes that anchor and persist, is essentially a map of emotional experience over time. The top notes make the first impression. The base notes are what you remember. The perfume industry stands at a genuinely strange crossroads right now. On one side, synthetic biology is beginning to produce aromatic compounds of extraordinary complexity using engineered microorganisms. Biotechnology companies are creating lab-grown versions of oud, musk, and ambergris that are chemically identical to their natural sources without the environmental destruction or animal cruelty. Givaudan and Firmenich, the two largest fragrance companies in the world, are investing heavily in this technology. The argument for it is compelling. You get the scent, without the habitat destruction, without the exploited supply chains, without the declining wild populations. On the other side, a growing movement within niche perfumery is pushing back hard toward natural materials, traditional extraction methods, and what advocates call olfactive authenticity. These perfumers argue that synthetic compounds, however sophisticated, lack the complexity and variation of natural materials because natural materials are themselves chemically complex mixtures that vary based on weather, soil, and season in ways that a laboratory cannot replicate. A Bulgarian rosado from a dry year smells different from one grown in a wet year. That variation is not a flaw. It is part of what makes it alive. Both positions contain real truth. And the tension between them is the same tension that has defined perfume across its entire history. The tension between what is sacred and what is manufactured. Between the altar smoke rising toward a Sumerian god and the laboratory flask producing coumarin in an East London chemistry workshop. Between Taputi Belate Kalam filtering resins through water in a Babylonian palace and Ernest Bose adding aldehydes to a glass flask in a French research laboratory. The tools change. The impulse behind them never does. Human beings have always wanted to create something invisible, something that cannot be seen or touched, that moves through the air and reaches inside another person and makes them feel something. For 1,000 years of history, and that desire has not changed by a single molecule. The bottle on your dressing table is not just a fragrance. It is the current endpoint of the oldest continuous human experiment still running. And it started with smoke rising toward gods that may or may not have been listening. But someone decided the attempt was worth making. And they were right. If this reshaped the way you think about something you use every single day, the next video on screen will do the same thing to another story you think you already know. We will see you there.